So part of our collection includes rare and non-circulating books, and they cover a wide variety of topics from religious texts all the way through to things like our rare book collection, which was donated by Rebecca Ramos, who was a staff member in our IT department, to books and other materials that may have come out of our circulating collection from a long time ago and have been deemed either rare or too fragile to circulate, and so they become part of our archives and special collections. So this is just one example of our natural history books. This is a multi-volume French set involving hand-drawn illustrations and hand-painted illustrations of various animals and birds and insects around the world. And what's really neat about them is that they include all of the anatomical drawings and all of the really detailed painted illustrations. Some of them are more accurate than others. But we also have things like children's primers, which are sort of little moral stories and books for children. Sometimes they were used in Sunday school, sometimes they were used in homeschooling and things like that. And then some of you may have read in different classes things like Milton's Paradise Lost. So we have volumes of books that are classics or materials that you may find in some of your classes. So we have various editions of those as well in our collection. Some of them belong to particular people that may have a connection with the college, so they may have an inscription, and some of them may have just made their way to our collections by donation or by coming out of the general library. Large part of our collections include the history of the college. So that could be everything from photographs of the basketball team through to student organizations may donate their records, records of the president, so the papers, letters, correspondence, and such. And sometimes we receive donations from alumni and family members who may have attended Providence College. Other times, you know, we have publications like the yearbooks and the alembic and things like that. Our first yearbook, which was still called Veritas, was published in 1928. So there were a few years at the beginning where we had no yearbook. And then we took a break and didn't start doing a yearbook again until the 1930s. But there were so few students that each student had like a whole page to sort of talk about their future and what they did at the college. But in the 1940s, during World War II, the students decided to save some money and save resources, and they designed their own yearbook, and they each sort of clipped material from other publications on campus to sort of save money, and then they had photos printed from their significant events. We receive a lot of donations from alumni, which is how we sort of fill in the gaps of our collections. This one in particular was donated this year, even though it's from class of 1923. One of our class of 2023, Bella Corey, donated this. It was from one of her relatives who attended here in 1923. So that's kind of a cool full circle story of the history of Providence College 100 years later. We're receiving material back that was part of the campus then. So hi, my name is Michelle Chiles. My pronouns are she, her. I'm the head of archives and special collections here at Providence College at the Phillips Memorial Library. And that kind of means that I take care of the history of the college, including the records of various offices, documents, photographs, memorabilia that sort of document the history of the college. And we also have special collections and manuscripts, including books and papers from various organizations and people in Rhode Island. I've been at Providence College for just over 2 years. I started in December of 2019. So most of my time here has been during the pandemic. So I still feel very new, even though I've been here for 2 years. I'm just figuring out where things are on campus. But it's been a really good 2 years, even with that sort of looming over our heads. So I love archives because it really helps us document the history of particular events and places and particularly people. Everything that's in an archive was created by individuals, by people, And then one of the really interesting parts about the work of an archivist is that, we make decisions on what is kept and how it's organized, and that's really kind of important because that puts a lot of decision making on particular people to decide what's important to keep, what's important to describe. But really, we help tell the story of, wherever it is that we are working in an archive. So whether it's a college or the historical society or, a music organization, we help document that history. Archives are full of primary sources. So they're records that are kept contemporary to the time like an event happened. So that is sort of a first-hand account of an event. So whether it's a tragedy or a celebration or anything like that, material in the archives are sort of a real-time account of what happened. And you can kind of piece that together to build a narrative. So one photograph, one newspaper clipping, one diary entry can kind of help put together a story that tells a more complete picture. So the archives are open by research appointment, and they're open by appointment because we want to talk to you first and figure out what it is you're researching so you can kind of make the best use of your time. All of our collections are stored in closed shelves, unlike the library books that you can sort of go and grab yourself. And so it helps us help you get the materials that you're interested in and sort of steer you in the right direction to use the collections. But it's really easy to make appointments, and we have a wide variety of topics from the college history all the way through various Rhode Island topics. So we probably have material for any number of your research projects. The college has had their eye on this 50 years of coeducation for a long time, knowing that it's a very significant event in our college history. It made a major change in the dynamics of the college. So we've been thinking about it for a long time, and I'm part of one of the committees. There are many, many committees that were formed to plan various events and programs around campus and think about the history. And as part of that committee, we decided to do an exhibit in the library and also a traveling version of that exhibit where we just made panels that can move around to various parts of campus. And really we just started looking into the archives and started digitizing and scanning things right away, regardless of whether we knew we were going to use them in the exhibit or not, because we knew that they may be used in social media for other departments, for other programs, and things like that. And so we really just sort of looked through our collections for anything related to the first women in that first class, first faculty, even going way, way back to the School of Sacred Theology, because we really actually graduated women as early as 1926. And so even though our first undergraduate class graduated in 1975, coming in 1971, we had women, taking classes at Providence College for almost our entire history. I think one of the most interesting women that I've come across on campus was Helen Burke. She was she was brought on as the athletic manager. She had several titles because she was here for quite a long time for women's recreation and athletics, because it was really obvious from the get-go that they needed to have somebody who was coordinating recreational and physical activities for the new women students. And a lot of her material and documentation in the archives, she really showed how much she was advocating for the sort of fair and equal access to things like the gym and different places on campus for the women students, which was really challenging, thinking about how campus is run and changing up people's patterns of behavior. And so I think, just advocating for women to have sort of an equal place in that part of campus and in addition to the classroom made a big impact. I hope that the future of women at Providence College just continues to grow. I mean, women outnumber men on college campuses all across the country, and making those huge impacts. And as cool as it is to find in the collections the first this or the first that when we're talking about women's history or the history of people of color. It gets a little tiresome to always be looking at the first, because we should be past those by now, and thinking about how, you know, new impacts can be made. And so I think that's the role of women, just to say, you know, we aren't the first, we're not new, you know, we're here and we're part of it and essential to the story of the college. So the 50 years of women at Providence College documents the history of women at the college from as early as the Veridames, which was a women's auxiliary group that started in the 40s to run charity groups and fundraising events and programming for the students. And even earlier, we had the Summer School of Sacred Theology, which was a educational program for nuns to come and earn certificates and degrees in theology. And that was as early as 1926. Prior to that, or following along to that, in the 1950s and 60s, there was rumblings about shifting the college to a coeducational college. And so, especially into the late 1960s, they started polling alumni, faculty, and staff, and getting people's input on how that would change the campus, and sort of gathering input on how they would make the campus a coeducational environment. Overwhelmingly, from the beginning of the sort of decision-making process, it was positive. There were a few standing out opposition, but, you know, for the most part, everybody was on board. There were always questions and thoughts about how that would change campus, but as you can see, when they polled the students, almost 90% of the students were in favor. And even with the alumni who had already come and gone, were in favor of coeducation as well, and as well as the faculty and staff. So. And then over here, so the first class came in September of 1971, so 50 years ago this past fall. And, you know, some of the major changes that happened were the introduction of the summer orientation, which hadn't been a thing prior to this year, but they figured there were so many changes on campus that they needed to have a more structured orientation process to sort of bring everybody together and to the same page. And then obviously things like the Cowl and even the local newspapers covered it because it was such a significant change to one of the major schools here in Providence. The handbook got a lot larger in terms of different rules, and there were even some rules that applied to women and not to men, and there was pushback on that as well. That's so interesting. I can imagine the new rules in those. So, you know, we had our earliest women on campus with the School of Sacred Theology, but there's always been faculty and staff as part of the administration and the teaching core of Providence College. And this case sort of highlights some of those significant members of our faculty and staff over the years. By no means is this everybody, but it is a few highlights from various years, even up to today, with current faculty and staff. And then in the early years of the early 1970s, in those first few years, they created a women's liaison committee, which basically was faculty and staff, women who got together with students to help sort of talk about issues on campus and support the women students. So they held things like the wine and cheese night, just to sort of talk about the issues that may come up as a new student on a newly changed campus. As early as women started coming to PC for their undergraduate education, we started forming recreational activities and student organizations that were specific to women, but then opening up all of those clubs and organizations to women as well. So cheerleading was one of the first recreational club sports that was available to women at PC, but as you can see, a wide variety of sports were available early on. And then with the women's organizations, there are specific women's student groups, but then broadly, women were involved with things like the Olympic and the yearbook, Friars Club, and this was donated by one of the first women members of the Friars Club. It was her blazer. She was class of 75. Barbara Quinn Whitbeck, who is the current faculty member. So.